Well, good evening, everyone. We're now to the question time part of the evening. So is Phil Gard in the room, please?
I'll stand up. The demands on the NHS are infinite. The budget is finite. How would you propose to square that circle?
Tim, would you like to say that one first?
That is an easy one. No, it's not. First of all, the demands are even greater than we're being told by politicians of all sides. Simon Stevens reckoning that we needed £8 billion in order to plug the gap in the National Health Service spending doesn't really actually tell the whole story. The King's Fund only the other day came out with a much larger gap that is likely to be the case. I think the reality is that there is a way of looking again at how our NHS is funded and how it operates, which could be very, very radical, and that could potentially give us a very special place in the political landscape and indeed in our history as a nation. That is to acknowledge the fact that social care, as the poor relation of the National Health Service, would be part of the National Health Service had people been living to the ages they are now at the point that William Beveridge wrote his historic report. And if you think about it, there are vast costs within the National Health Service racked up by the inefficiencies of that false divide between the two. And then we add to that the reality that we have so many people who realise that their dignity and care in later life are hanging upon a system which is hanging by a thread, funded by ever-reducing funding to local government, and indeed the fact that you've got so many wonderful people providing that social care, and yet they could earn more money stacking shelves in Asda. And we absolutely need to tackle that. And a radical solution I want us to absolutely explore is the full merger of social care and the National Health Service to create more efficiencies. But let us not pretend that might not actually cost the taxpayer more money. And if that is the case, we need to level, and we need to be the party that will level with the electorate, that if you want to genuinely be cared from cradle to grave and have that dignity throughout your life and be sure of it in advance, then it might end up costing us 1 or 2p extra on income tax. That is the way we're going to look at that. The reality is we can't have a National Health Service on the cheap. You can't go giving tax cuts to the rich, as George Osborne will do this week, and have decent quality public services.
So I think just first of all, is this on? Is this working okay? Right, hang on a second. Right. So first of all, the situation, it is, I believe that we face the potential for the system to crash in this Parliament. And the political focus is always on the NHS, not on social care. But actually we need to look at the two together, and we need to create a far greater emphasis on prevention, on preventing ill health, preventing a deterioration of health. And as soon as I was appointed to my job in 2012, I argued from day one in a discussion with Jeremy Hunt that the whole focus must be on integration of care, integration of health and social care, integration, incidentally, of mental health and physical health. We have managed extraordinarily to institutionally fragment the system so that your mental health is dealt with completely separately from your physical health. This makes no sense from the patient's point of view at all. So I pioneered the idea of allowing different parts of the country to just get on and merge their two systems together, joining up care around the needs of the patient. And I think if we can focus much more on prevention, then we can make better use of the resources that are available. But the bottom line is that the system needs more money. And I think this is what you're highlighting. France and Germany, by way of example, spend about a third more on their health and care system than we do. This is the best system in the world, according to the Commonwealth Fund, in terms of equity and in terms of quality. So we should be very proud of our NHS. But I have called for a non-partisan commission to be set up this year, with all the parties committing to it, so that we come up with a new funding settlement for the NHS and critically for social care as well. My worry with Tim's proposal for effectively free social care is that instead of a funding gap of 30 billion plus about 7 billion in social care, you would then add on another very many more billions on top of that. in Scotland, the system of free social care hasn't worked. Ultimately, people are now contributing to the cost of their social care. And the problem is we're seeing costs rising at about 4% a year across the developed world because we're all living longer and we're living with multiple conditions. The number of people living with 3 or more conditions is going to go up by 50% in 10 years. This is the scale of the challenge we face. So this is why I argue for a commission to be set up now to work through how we can ensure that we afford our health and care system. And the bottom line is we must be prepared to spend more on it. And my view is that I would be prepared to spend more, pay more tax to ensure that we had a good system. But critically, we also need to make better use of the money that's available to us. And that involves joining up the system, ending this ridiculous silo, fragmented approach that we have at the moment.
The next question's from Barry Holiday.
Oh, that's useful. I've got a microphone. What will you do to help local election candidates in non-MP target constituencies?
Well, a perfect question, really, because this goes down to how we fight back. And I think the big challenge we have is that if you're a member of the party, particularly all those new members who've joined, feeling a sense of excitement and a sense of commitment also to rebuilding the Liberal voice, but if you're stuck in what we call as a black hole, then you could hear nothing from anyone. And we have to, I think, develop a programme where every local party in our country sets themselves a plan for how they start to build. And even if it's just one seat that they seek to win on their local council, that should be their ambition. And every local party could set an objective. It has to be achievable because otherwise people become demoralised. But if every local party in our country has a plan, and then if they get access to the training and development and support they need to actually campaign effectively, then we could start to see some really exciting things happen. There should really be no black holes in our party. We should be prepared to campaign everywhere, however small it might be, to create that first bridgehead. And it comes back to what I said in my opening. Do we really think it's sensible to have an expensive HQ in London? We have to have an HQ, of course, but we spend a lot of resource on that centralised headquarters with a centralised campaign operation based in Westminster, when I think as a campaigning party it's better to have the campaigners and the trainers on the ground supporting the local campaigns, helping you to make that first breakthrough.
So one of the things that I think got me properly involved with the party after I joined as a teenager was the reality of Liberal Democrat community politics on the ground. These are people who had great ideals and yet they put them into practice. My great political hero is a woman nearly none of you will ever have heard of called Neva Orrell, who was the councillor for Leyland when I first joined in Lancashire. And she joined the party in 1949 because she'd lived through a war, she'd lost loved ones, she wanted to join a party that believed in the kind of internationalism and commitment to peace that would make that least likely to happen again. And you know what? She spent the next 53 years of her life pounding the pavements of Leyland, making a difference for a community. Because if you say you care about people, and you say you're internationalist, you say you care about the individual, then you prove it in your community, week in, week out, and that is what Liberal Democrats do. So we need to make sure that we reboot community politics and put it at the absolute heart of everything we do. I'm a bit fed up over the years of us migrating to a situation where winning council seats is only seen as a way of building up to winning a parliamentary seat. The winning a council seat yourself is somehow a stepping stone to being an MP, somehow second division to being an MP. Do you know what? This morning, I very proudly cut the ribbon on the opening of 10 more affordable homes in Kirkby Lonsdale in my constituency. And I'll take a lot of credit for that, I'm sure, in the local media and all the rest of it. The reality is, my councillors did that. I didn't do it. I might have helped them win an election. My councillors built those houses and the 1,000 others that they built over the last 10 years. Local government is where it's at. That's where you can make a difference, and it's where our fight back will come from as well. And I absolutely believe that whilst it might seem a mountain to climb to fight a kind of target seat style campaign across a whole constituency from scratch, do you know what? Everybody can pick one word. My first acronym, if I'm leader, POWOWI. Pick a ward and win it. Pick a ward and win it. POWOWI. You heard it here first. And the point is, you can do that crazy by-election thing in one ward if you've got no seats already, or 2 wards if you've got 1 seat already. And you get where I'm going with all this. Now I want to make sure, by working with ALDC, we're based in Manchester, of course, and our campaigns department working out in the regions, that we help people to do just that. We won all those target seats in 97 onwards, not just because we targeted those seats, but also because we had strong parties around those target seats. You can't win the seats like Chesterfield, you can't win the seats that we've had, Sheffield Hallam and others in this part of the world, if you haven't got strong seats around them to send people in. And that means you've got to build from the grassroots absolutely everywhere.
Next question's from John Bland. Is John Bland in the room?
The SME sector is one of the major contributors to the British economy. What message can the Liberal Democrats give to encourage the SME sector to support the party?
Tim.
Great question, and I think this is a critical area that we need to tackle, because the reality is, if you are working in small business of one kind or another, then the chances are you might think the Tories are the party of business, and you might think the Labour Party kind of hates business, and you're not quite clear who the Liberal Democrats are, and you want to know who they are. And I'll tell you this, amongst the things that I found most offensive, and I thought Ed Miliband, perfectly decent guy, but amongst the things that he said that really, really offended me was his talk about good business and bad business. This implication that people who are involved in business are somehow wicked people. The reality is, if we are liberals, surely we think the entrepreneurial spirit is the liberal spirit. It's creative. It's about being self-directional, being in charge of your own life. It's about creating opportunities for others. And I'll tell you what, the thought that these folks are fat cats, some of the poorest people I know run their own business. They're the kind of people... they're the kind of people who own, said with feeling some of that, I imagine. But they're the kind of people who will employ half a dozen to a dozen people, and even when times are tough, because they know those people, because they have affection for those people, because they know the names of those people's kids and all the rest of it, and they know their mortgages depend upon it, will keep those people in work at the same time as paying themselves less than the minimum wage, if anything at all. So we need to absolutely stand up and say, we are the party of small business. We believe in the free market, not the market that is dominated by monopolies and large corporations, but the market where you allow small and medium-sized enterprises to get into the market, to challenge, to make a difference. And that's what is so important. And I think, and it's not just about the rhetoric and the tone of what you say. We need to come up with a few things that will actually prove that we mean it. So here are 2 things that I've suggested already. One is you have the VATMOS situation, which is the European Union VAT registration system, which means lots of people who are digital business people, providers of those kind of services, have to cross the threshold much sooner than they would do otherwise, putting people off even entering into the European market. That's an easy thing to solve, and we should make sure you recalibrate VATMOS so that small businesses are not immediately penalised. The second thing is to say and to commit the fact that we would, through public procurement, make sure a minimum of 25% of commissioning should be done from small and medium-sized enterprises from the public sector. That will make a staggering difference. And I want to get to the next election where you get a situation where people will think, I am a small business person, therefore I am voting Liberal Democrat.
So I had a fascinating discussion with a woman a couple of weeks ago, a young black woman actually, who is an entrepreneur, and she'd been helped by the Prince's Trust to get her business going, And interestingly, she said that the Tories were all over her. They were round her business. They were trying to persuade her to join the party, to sort of be a ambassador for the Conservative Party and so on. And she said to me, I never see Liberal Democrats. And so we have to be able to demonstrate that we're on the side of those people, particularly young people who want to go out and start a business. And it should be, in the language we use and in the positions we take, we should be clear that it's as worthwhile a calling to become an entrepreneur, to try and build a business, to employ people, as it is to go into any other walk in life. We shouldn't look down our noses at those people. We should celebrate people who choose to be entrepreneurs and to build a successful business. In terms of the things that we should be doing, we have to demonstrate that we understand the problems that small businesses face. So cutting bureaucracy, it continues to be a nightmare for very many small businesses, whether it's dealing with tax or other forms of regulation that often drive businesses crazy. And finally, let me just make this point about education. Small businesses, as much as any other businesses, depend on people coming out of school with good quality education, with the skills that they need for the working life. And we still in this country get it wrong. There are so many children who are let down by the system. They call it the long tail of underachievement. All those youngsters, usually from disadvantaged backgrounds, who don't acquire the skills they need to become successful in adult life. And that's why this party has to be completely committed, for economic reasons as well as for liberal reasons, to properly investing in education.
Our next question's from Tony Faithful Wright. Tony, are you around?
Thank you. What would you do to make our party stand out more in the public eye against other main parties at an election?
Norman.
Well, the first thing I'd say is that where I think we went wrong in the last Parliament, and particularly in the run-up to the last election, was we just did not talk about our purpose. My heart sank that moment at the start of the election campaign when we were all told we must repeat the mantra that we will cut less than the Conservatives and borrow less than Labour. Because it defined us in relation to others. It said nothing about our purpose. And then it got worse because we started to insult people. You may remember we were told that we would give a heart to the Conservatives and a head to Labour. So it's like going out to people and saying, if you're a possible Conservative supporter or a possible Labour supporter, we don't think you've got a head or a heart, but come and vote for us anyway. That insulting people is not the best way to win friends and to influence people. So let's get back to talking about our values. And let's identify some key things that communicate those values to people out there. And I return to what I talked about earlier, my passion and my mission on mental health. This is a historic injustice. And it costs the economy something like £100 billion a year. It is economically stupid and it's morally wrong. And it touches every family in our country in one way or another. So I want, and I'm afraid, like it or not, if I'm elected leader, the pursuit of equality for people who suffer from mental ill health will be a mission for this party. And I think if you start to talk again about your values in that way, the things that you are really committed to as Liberals, treating people equally, no second-class citizens, then I think you connect with people in a way. Charles Kennedy was very good at connecting people by telling it straight. And whether it's about mental health, whether it's reforming our antiquated drug laws, whether it's about assisted dying, something that I passionately believe in myself as a Liberal, whether it's about Liberal solutions to our housing crisis, these are the things that connect with people and tell people what our purpose is again.
Tony, you picked on the key issue, I reckon. the danger is, this last 5 years, we've spent knocking on doors and fighting elections, and it's been tough, right? We've spent 5 years being derided. The great problem is, we now spend the possibility, or face the possibility of spending 5 years being ignored. In the words of Oscar Wilde, only one thing worse than being talked about, and that is not being talked about. And that is our great challenge. And we can't assume that the press, the media will be interested in us. However we talk and however passionately we talk, we have to pick issues that will resonate. And we have to speak in a language and in a way that will be spiky and will cut through. And much as I hate it, and I spent a month pretending to be him in the run-up to the Nick v Nigel debates last year. I pretended to be Nigel Farage. I've still got the purple tie, and it was entertaining trying to get into that guy's head. And it's not a nice place to be. But I can tell you, what he's very good at is, with complete audacity, wandering in to the media scrum as if he owns the place and if he's got a right to be there, even though he jolly well hasn't. Even though when he had no MPs whatsoever, he would be in there and people would take him seriously. You've got to speak as though you have an entitlement to be there. And you have to pick issues and talk about issues in a way that are different and stand out. And sometimes you have to go with what's on the horizon. So, for example, we are all going to be talking about the European Union, whether we like it or not, for the next 2 years. So let us speak about it in a way which is colourful and makes people sit up and take notice. So the Yes campaign will be all about pragmatic reasons for staying in the EU, and that is fine. 3 million jobs, chasing criminals across borders, they're good reasons to vote yes. But you know what? I want us to be speaking in a more lofty way, in a way which is inspiring and which is different, which is spiky. I want us to say, the European Union, do you know what? It is the most successful peace process in human history. That is what it is. I want us to talk about tackling the greatest existential threat, which is climate change, in a way which is not depressing and hair shirt and austerity, but is absolutely unifying, a collective patriotic endeavour almost, to make sure we make ourselves richer by being greener. I want to talk about issues that make people feel good about being Liberal Democrats. And I also want to pick things where the majority of people will really strongly dislike us. I don't care, so long as 25% absolutely love us. I want us to do what Paddy did, for example. When he picked after the Tiananmen Square massacre in '89, he bravely called for the Hong Kong citizens to be given British passports. Do you know what? The Daily Mail went bananas, but there was about 20% of people out there thought, that's for me. I'd not even thought about voting for that lot, but that sounds like the kind of person I want to be. And we need to speak to people out there in a way that makes the hair on the back of their neck stand on end, thinking, they're the people I've been waiting for. They're the people I want to be part of. My job, you'll be pleased to hear or be terrified to hear, I don't know, is not to get us to 40% and 326 seats to the next general election. My job is to get us out of single figures, into double figures, through the teens and into the 20s. And you do that by standing out, by saying things that people are surprised by, energised by, inspired by.
Next question is from Janice in Northampton. I haven't got a surname, I'm afraid. It's on immigration.
Immigration is a hot topic. How do you feel that we should be addressing this issue?
Tim.
Well, you first of all don't dismiss and demonise people who think it's an issue. But let me, without wanting to be overly simplistic about it, if people have genuine fears, we have to respect that and not talk down at them or to them. But here's an observation. What happens throughout history, and I see it happening now, the politics of fear, the politics of division. You see, people, when I was being Nigel Farage, when I felt I was being most effective in those practice runs, was when I was picking at Nick and saying things like, well, you know what, people can't get a house because of all these Romanians. People can't get on the GP's list because of all these Poles. People can't get themselves a hospital appointment because of all these people from Bulgaria or what have you. And the point is, that is an age-old problem and an age-old nasty trick from those in power. You see, what you do is you get poor white people, poor indigenous people, to blame poor immigrants, if you like, for the faults of the people at the top of the pile who never provided for them in the first place. The answer... Do you know what? The answer to the housing crisis is not fewer immigrants, but more flaming houses. And But we've also just got to talk about, we've got to not, we can't, when you're on 8% with 8 MPs, no room for nuance whatsoever. Immigration is a blessing, not a curse. And let us make sure we say things that just surprise people. So, your UKIP types will go even more purple than they are normally if you tell them there are 2.5 million EU immigrants in this country at the moment. And do you know what? You then say, hang about, there's just under 2.5 million Brits elsewhere in the EU. There are currently 10,000 Brits on the dole in Germany, for example. Tens of thousands more working, you'll be pleased to hear. And also, how should I put this sensitively? There are something like 500,000 older British people somewhere in the south of Spain saving the British National Health Service a bloody fortune by getting old there. And simply, so be respectful, but let's be spiky and tell it how it is.
I was on Any Questions a couple of weeks ago, and I had the enormous pleasure of sitting next to Nigel Farage. And it was interesting. It was the week of Calais, and I wondered whether it was going to be a very difficult week for a Liberal being on the platform, particularly on it with Nigel Farage. But I told the story of 2 brothers who were in Calais, aged 10 and 17, and there was a photograph in the newspaper of the 17-year-old brother helping the 10-year-old onto a lorry to try and hide on his way across the channel to the UK. Those 2 brothers were orphans from Eritrea. They'd been in that camp for weeks, if not months on end. No one looking after them at all. These are human beings. It's a disgrace what's going on there. And I made the Liberal case for why we should be making our contribution to sorting out this refugee crisis. There is moral cowardice going on. David Cameron is refusing to play his part in taking our fair share of refugees, and it's a disgrace. And all those people losing their lives in the Mediterranean, and we are standing by and watching. So we as a country have to play our part. And the interesting thing was, Farage got no applause at all. I got applause for giving a liberal, humanitarian, decent message about looking after human beings properly. And that's what we have to do. And I tell you also this, I spent a morning with a man from Sardinia who was working as a care worker in London. Most of the people, I think all bar one of the people working in his company were migrants. They were people from other countries in Europe and beyond. They were doing absolutely vital work in our country, caring for some of the most vulnerable people in our society. Outrageously, they were being paid less than the minimum wage because they weren't paid their travel. It's a disgrace. We should celebrate those people and treat them properly, not denigrate them. And you know this, we've ended up with a situation in our country where the term migrant worker is almost a term of abuse. Asylum seeker is certainly a term of abuse. But we are a decent country with decent, civilised, liberal values. And we as a party need to stand up for those values and make the case for treating people who come to our country, who enhance our culture, who benefit our economy, treating them properly.
Next question's from Lorraine Johnson. Lorraine? Leon, that side.
Lorraine.
Hi. You've partially answered this question already, but I'll ask it anyway. What I wanted to know is when either of you is elected as our leader, as one of you is guaranteed.
One of us has to be.
Yeah. How are you going to campaign on the European referendum, and what will you do to keep us in Europe?
Well, I'll answer it in 2 parts. First thing to say is we must argue with our heads and our hearts, trying to connect with people on both of those levels, because actually for ordinary families in our country, jobs are incredibly important, and ensuring that there is security of employment and if we were to leave the European Union, it would be disastrous for jobs in this country. You just think of all those companies internationally who want to hit the 500 million citizen single market. Are they going to locate their factories and their headquarters in a country outside the European Union? Of course they're not. And all those companies currently here will think again about whether they should stay. Quite apart from the City of London, which depends enormously as a global capital for finance on our participation in the European Union. So we have to make the case based on our heads as well as our hearts. But if you then think, I give this in two parts. First of all, I remember as a child on holiday in Germany, visiting my sister who was doing a degree in German, and she was spending 1 year in Germany. And we travelled to the East-West German border. And we drove down a country lane and we got to the barbed wire fence which just cut across the road. And ahead of us we saw the ploughed strip of land which was mined. And I can still see it now in my mind's eye. I can see the lookout towers, the watch towers with soldiers on there. And it's interesting, today we think about all the efforts that are made by governments to keep people out of countries. Migrants, stopping them, illegal immigrants coming in. These were soldiers watching to keep people in, keep people imprisoned. And it's not that long ago. And now they're all part of the European Union. All those former Eastern Bloc countries now trading with us, participating in decision making with us. It is a triumph. This continent has turned its back on conflict and has chosen instead to work together. And we must maintain that, and we lose it at our peril. But then just looking forward, this is the final thing I wanted to say. If you just think about the massive challenges we face as a society, both at home and globally, it's things like global warming, it's things like conflict, the mass migration that can flow from both conflict and global warming. And I believe we're just seeing the start of it now. And the flows could get far greater with both conflict and sometimes conflict caused by global warming. Look at Bangladesh, the potential for it going underwater at some point in the not too distant future because of rising sea levels. The flows of migrants could be vast. Are we better at dealing with these challenges isolated on our own or together? And so for young people thinking about the future, thinking about a country that is confident, self-confident, outward-looking, punching above its weight, seeking to tackle these massive global challenges, our future has to be in Europe.
Well, Lorraine, I remember perhaps a year ago, certainly 18 months ago, probably even a year ago, people were saying, well, you know what, it'll be an easy win to maintain the union north of the border. And then suddenly a lack of intelligence in the election campaign, a lack of hope in that referendum campaign, and a lack of unity in that referendum campaign nearly lost us the United Kingdom, nearly lost Scotland from our family of nations. So the first thing is we must not be complacent about winning an in-out referendum on the European Union. And some things matter even more, dare I say it, than the survival of our party, and that is the maintenance of our country's future. But I tell you what, in this case, the two go together. And they go together because here is an opportunity for us to stand out and to be different and to be clear about what we believe. And we look at what we're going to be campaigning on. So yes, those pragmatic reasons for staying in the European Union are absolutely vital. And that case was made to the Scottish people over the Union last year, but it wasn't sufficiently compelling to mean that the SNP didn't have the narrative of excitement and inspiration with them. So the one thing I am most definitely not is a nationalist. But you know what? I'm a sucker for hope. And I saw what happened north of the border, and I thought the SNP's campaign was exciting and inspiring, and I want to not allow the No campaign to turn this into a kind of English, even British nationalist election where people are saying this is about devolving power back from Europe. I want us to say that we're not about lionising and loving the European Commission. The European Commission is just as faulty as any bureaucracy, Nottingham City Council, Lancashire County Council, except as anything else. As Westminster Parliament, Holyrood, you name it, is another dysfunctional bureaucracy. I don't love the European Commission, but I do love my neighbours. I do love the French, I do love the Poles. I do love the Spanish. I love my neighbours. And I was brought up in, born in 1970. I was a teenager when they were making things like Threads and The Day After Tomorrow. I remember the day when on Fishergate Hill in Preston, the laundrette turned into a nuclear fallout shelter showroom. It really did. And I thought, flipping heck, it must be about to happen. Watching when the wind blows. Growing up in that period of time and thinking, hang about, today, around that table, 28 countries arguing the toss about fishing quotas. Half a dozen had nuclear weapons on their soil pointed right at this city. That'll do for me as a reason to be within the European Union. And we need to be making that passionate case in a way that others will not. But fundamentally, we have to work with others and make sure we learn the lessons from a shocking Yes to AV campaign and a shocking Better Together campaign north of the border. So we run this time an absolutely wonderful, effective campaign to keep Britain in the EU.
I'm sorry to say we're running out of time, so we've come to our last question, and that's going to come from Callum Beck. Callum? I didn't know you could run that fast.
Callum?
Thanks.
Hi. What are your three main objectives for the Liberal Democrats, and how do you hope to achieve them?
Great. Well, I think I was asked that question at Bilthwells in Wales, and I'll give you the answer I gave to that in a moment. A simple answer to it is about inspiring those tens of thousands of people in this country who are Liberals in here and to turn them into Liberal Democrats there. That's what's already happened with 18,000 people. If 18,000 people will join your movement without being asked, then by golly, just think how many tens or hundreds of thousands might join if you asked them. So we asked them. Secondly, what you've got to do is make sure that you build an effective election winning machine by making sure that your resources are targeted in the right places, and you make sure you oil that machine with inspiration, and you make sure you talk to people in a language that is inspiring, that takes people from the point where they achieve something wonderful back to the point where they begin their engagement. So, I mean, anecdote number one, really, I was walking my kids on the beach, really, not far from my house in Cumbria, about 3 months ago, bumped into a family, mum and dad and a little girl, and the mum said out of my earshot to my daughter, she said, "You should be really proud of your daddy. We were in a one-room bed sit and he rehoused us. Be really proud of your daddy." And Gracie told me this when I got back home, and I had a little cry. And then I said, if you think about it, sweetheart, you deliver the 55 houses in our estate every month. As a result, we won the council seat. As a result, we won the council. As a result, we built 1,000 council houses. You housed that family. Be proud of yourself, sweetheart. And I want people to understand around the country that their activism and their energy being put into all of these things is about achieving wonderful things like that. That is what politics is all about. And then thirdly, I want to just talk about how we pick the issues and the messages that resonate. Like I said before, do not assume you have any right as a party, or we have any right as a party to be heard in the coming 5 years. We have to earn that right by being spiky, by being different, by being insurgent, by being guerrillas, if you like, of politics, and making sure we earn our place at the centre. So those are my three things. But you know what? In Bilthwells, when I was asked that question, it was the end of a long, hot day, and Norman had just given a very good answer about his three policy objectives, and I thought, well, I'm not going to try and match him on that and just repeat pretty much exactly what Norman had said, because it was an excellent answer. And I thought, my three objectives for this party: winning, winning, winning. You change no one's life from second place.
And, oh, blimey, that's scary. Sorry to deafen you all. So the way I would answer it is this. First of all, I go back to what I said at the start. We need to sort out the way our party operates. And I just highlight one thing that I didn't mention earlier on. We believe as Liberals in diversity, thank you, in enabling every person, whoever they are, whatever their gender or their background, their ethnic minority background, their disability, whether they are gay or straight, whoever they are, they must have the same chance to succeed and be treated on their merits as individuals. It's an incredibly important Liberal principle, but we don't live by those principles in the way in which we operate our party always. We are the least diverse party in British politics, and that is not acceptable. So I want us by 2020 to be really proud of the progress we've made, to be able to hold our heads high, and to think we have made massive progress in enabling everyone to advance in our party, whoever they are. And it's a massive undertaking that we've got ahead of us, but we have to do that if we are to succeed. Secondly, again, we must become a really effective election-winning machine, returning to those principles of community politics, giving people a reason to vote for us. And I think we've lost sight of that. In some areas, I went to Oadby in Wigston, and I saw that amazing group of councillors working in their communities, giving people a reason to vote Liberal Democrat. That's why they keep winning there. And it happens all over the country. Hinckley have been doing it brilliantly, and many other places as well. But we have to return to that. We have to learn again how to campaign effectively, to give power to people. But let me just say this, and I think it's incredibly important. We will not win simply by campaigning harder. We have to win the battle of ideas as well as campaigning effectively. And if we can combine those two, then I think we can become an unstoppable force. And if we can inspire a new generation of young people, then this is the party of the future. All those young people who have liberal values and instincts, they are there waiting for us, but we have to go out and reach out to them. And if we do that, we can be successful. And we can build a liberal, radical, progressive movement of change. And I'm determined that we do just that.
Well, I think we've heard tonight we have two fabulous candidates, so good luck to both of them. And I'll now call on the regional president to come and say the thank you.
Tim, Norman, and so that I cannot be accused of being biased, Norman, Tim, thank you very much for blessing the East Midlands Liberal Democrats with your presence. One of you will be the eyes of the British people for the Liberal Democrats and the face of the ordinary people. And like every leader that has served us, whether it be Tim or Norman or Tim, you will stand head and shoulders above either of the other party leaders. But everyone in this room must play their part. We must place our prospective parliamentary candidates and council candidates in office as early as possible. Believe me, it takes every minute of every day for candidates to work really hard to be successful. Sadly, I was never successful in the 8 Westminster elections that I fought. But in the Old Tottenham seat, Teambridge came out of it. And you know that Chesterfield was also successful. Fellow Liberal Democrats, show your thanks and admiration to two superb potential leaders by giving them, as you've already done so this evening, another standing ovation.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think we can agree on several things tonight. First of all, the Liberal Democrats are the winners here tonight because we have two fantastic candidates. And most importantly, we were right. The East Midlands husting, I'm sure, has been the best husting that these two guys have attended. So thanks for coming, and travel safely home, and don't forget, out on the doorsteps tomorrow, because we've been invigorated by these two guys. Thanks for coming, folks.